Welcome back to another episode with Fight Pass with Mitch, presented by Notorious Pulls Radio. And for this week's episode, we're going to go over a highly anticipated flyweight matchup against Kara-France versus Amir Albazi. But remember, before we get into it, make sure you leave a like, follow, and subscribe us on all social media platforms. So let's get into it. UFC Fight Night, June 3rd at the Apex Arena. Kara-France, the number 3 ranked flyweight, going against Amir Albazi, the number 7th ranked flyweight in the UFC. This is an amazing matchup because I love when the flyweights are able to headline a main event. At one point, can you imagine that Dana White was going to actually eliminate this division? And that's another reason why I'm so grateful to Henry Cejudo. When TJ Dillashaw actually went down to the flyweight to contend for the belt, Cejudo iced him, and he essentially saved the flyweight division for the long term, and now it is easily one of the most exciting divisions to watch. So let's get into the details. Kara-France, 24-10. Last loss was to Brandon Moreno. He is a very well-decorated flyweight fighter, fighting out of New Zealand, training out of the same gym as Israel Adesanya. His fights before that, he was on a beautiful 3-fight winning streak against Askar Askarov. He had a nice win against Cody Garbrandt via TKO. He had a great win over Rogerio Boteron, which he beat him by knockout. And he obviously lost to Brandon Royval via guillotine. His opponent, obviously no slouch in the flyweight division, has been on a 4-fight UFC winning streak in his run. He had a beautiful win against Alessandro Costa, which was via knockout. He also had a great win against Francisco Figueiredo, which is Deiveson Figueiredo's brother, which he beat him by rear naked choke. He also had a great win against Jaluga Shumagulov, and he had a great win with a triangle choke against Malcolm Gordon. This is a very key matchup because both guys have a lot of experience. But between these two, I'm kind of leaning much more closer to Amir Albazi. I just love the style of fight that he brings. He's a very calculated fighter. He's a very crafty fighter. I believe Kara-France brings this warrior mentality, this fight spirit, where he leaves it all on the line. But when it comes to high-level grapplers and submission specialists, is where he makes key mistakes. And that's what's kind of put him at the cusp and never really able to actually break that top 3, that top 5, where he's trying to get so dearly to become a world champion. Albazi, on the other hand, is a very intelligent fighter, very calculated, breaks down his opponents, fights with an immense IQ level when it comes into the octagon. I do believe he'll use Kara's energy and emotions against him, and he will be able to submit him on Saturday night. Like I said, this is only my prediction, but from what I see in all the tape that I've been watching, Amir Albazi is the next guy coming up. And a big win, a main event like this, easily puts him right away into 1 or 2 fights away from fighting for the title. So I am really excited for this fight. And there's a lot of great fights on this card, so we're going to keep going and keep breaking down. The next fight that I want to talk about is the co-main event, and that is the number 15th ranked featherweight, and that's Alex Caceres. This is what I call a veterans fight. You have Alex Caceres versus Daniel Pineda. These two gentlemen don't have the prettiest records, but like I said, when it comes to MMA, it's not always about a pretty record. It's about what they produce in the octagon and what kind of performance they're able to give for the fans. So Alex Caceres, 20-13, had a spectacular head kick TKO win over Julian Erosa in his last fight. He went all the way to the decision with Sodiq Yusuff. He also had a nice rear naked choke against Seung Woo Choi, and he had a great win against Kevin Kroom. By the way, this is Alex Caceres, already 27 fights that he has had with the UFC promotion. I mean, that is unbelievable how durable and what a long career he's already had in London itself, and especially with the UFC. His opponent, Daniel Pieta, has a record of 28-14. He's coming off a win via guillotine over Tucker Lutz. The fight before that, he had a no contest against Andre Fili. He had a vicious knockout loss against Cub Swanson, and he was able to beat Herbert Burns, who's currently retired, and that's Gilbert Burns' brother. The way I see this fight going, I'm a huge Alex Caceres fan. I always believe he's been coming to all his fights as the underdog with the chip in his shoulder, Bruce Lee boy, that Karate Kid lifestyle. But he is very crafty, and he will be able to finish Daniel Pieta Saturday night. I truly believe that styles make fights, and I believe that he has the knockout power, and he has these crafty kicks and these great submissions. He is so phenomenal. He's so long for the featherweight division. I do believe once he's going to be able to wrap up Daniel Pieta Saturday night, it's going to be a beautiful submission victory, whether it's guillotine, triangle, rear naked choke. I can't predict exactly the way he's going to finish it, but I do believe this fight ends on the ground and it ends by submission. Another massive veteran fight is going on after that one, and that is Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. And this is a lightweight matchup. As you know, Jim Miller is going to be a future UFC Hall of Famer without a doubt. Record 35-17. Has been with the UFC since I became a fan as a kid. His last loss was obviously to Alexander Hernandez, where Hernandez pulled off a really, really great win over the vet. But before that, he was on a beautiful 3-fight winning streak over the Hall of Famer currently, Donald Cerrone. He beat Nicholas Mata. He has a win over Eric Gonzalez. His opponent, Jared Gordon, has had some unfortunate swing of events in his last 2 fights. His last fight against Bobby Green was unfortunately overturned to a no contest via clash of heads. So that fight, it was unfortunate. And before that, a lot of people, the fans, say that the judges robbed him. He had a loss to Paddy Pimblett. There was a lot of issues saying they needed to do a rematch against that fight, that fight should have went to Jared. Nonetheless, the UFC obviously made it up to Jared Gordon and gave him a really good fight against Jim Miller. He had a great win against Leonardo Santos, Jared Gordon prior to that. And I do believe that styles make fights. And I'm going to be edging over to, as a fan favorite, I'm going to have to rock with Jim Miller. I just grew up watching him. It's hard to say. I don't know if this will be Jim Miller's last fight in the octagon. But if it is, I think this is a great opponent. And I'm really happy this is happening in the Apex. It's going to be a small crowd. We're going to really hear the punches. It's a little bit of a smaller octagon, so it's less room for them to run around away from each other. I think there's going to be a lot of pocket fighting in the center, and I don't believe that this fight will be going to the decision. I think Jim Miller is going to win this fight via TKO or KO, so I'm really excited between these two veterans to go head-to-head against each other. And I know Jared Gordon is desperately seeking a win. He's had a lot of bad turn of events, but I don't believe he'll be able to edge this fight. I do believe Jim Miller is he's that dude. He has that grit in him. He's had a lot of knockouts in the UFC, and he's going to continue for as long as he keeps fighting to put on top performances and memorable performances for the fans. One of the key fights that I want to finish off with is a fight that is a must-see. And this is between 2 up-and-coming rising lightweights. When I get into this and explain, we have Jamie Mullarkey, 16-5, going against Guram, the Georgian Viking, Kutadalidze. These two are going to put an absolute clinic. Malarkey is currently on a 2-fight win streak. His last win was against Francisco Prado. He also picked up a beautiful win against Michael Johnson. He lost to the very long, crafty Jalen Turner, and he had a win against Devontae Smith. Guram, on the other hand, hasn't had a lot of fights in the UFC itself. He has a record of 12-3, but the two opponents that he has fought in the UFC are literally top 10. This guy has not had one easy fight, and all the fights that they schedule for Guram are insane. His entry fight into the UFC, he had a win over Matizius Gamrot. And his last fight that he lost was, unfortunately, against Damir Ismagulov, which was one of the exciting lightweights in the UFC, which he's currently retired for unforeseeable reasons. But we are so excited to have Guram. Guram is a very well-decorated fighter, trains with Khamzat Chimaev. That should say a lot. A guy at that high level to be a training partner for one of the biggest stars in the UFC should speak nonetheless of itself. He might be not such a charismatic guy, not a very verbal guy on social media, but like I said, you have to watch his work. Watch what he does in the octagon. See who he trains with. See who he surrounds himself with. That will tell you enough in itself that he is a top 10 guy in the UFC. He's only a few big fights away from fighting some of the biggest names that the UFC has to offer. Guys, remember, these two will be opening up the main event, and there's no doubt in my mind this will be one of the biggest performances in Guram's career. So please keep an eye out on this entry, on this opening fight in the main event on Saturday night, June 3rd, in the Las Vegas at the Apex Arena. And remember, this is your host, Mitchell, Fight Pass with Mitch. Remember, if you always want to support us and you love and enjoying watching our content, remember, we have some of the best merchandise around at notoriouspulls.com. Please leave a like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll see you soon.